Beneath the scorching Arizona sun of 1885, Beatrice Oliver's tears fell like rain as her father's body was lowered into the hard desert earth, her shoulders shaking with each muffled sob. The mourners, mostly townsfolk who'd barely known Jeremiah Oliver, shifted uncomfortably at the display of emotion. "Just like her mother," whispered Mrs. Holloway, the general store owner's wife, loud enough for Beatrice to hear. "All tears, no strength. The girl won't last a month on that homestead alone." Beatrice clutched her handkerchief tighter, the linen damp with grief. At 22, she was now alone in the world, with nothing but a struggling cattle ranch, mounting debts, and the crushing weight of her father's final words. "Be strong, Bea. This land is your legacy." The crowd dispersed quickly after the burial, eager to escape the oppressive heat and the awkward spectacle of a woman's sorrow. Only Sheriff Wilson lingered, his weathered face a mask of practiced sympathy. "Miss Oliver," he began, adjusting his hat. "I know this ain't the time, but there's the matter of your father's debts to consider. Folks at the bank are getting restless." Beatrice wiped her eyes, struggling to compose herself. "I'll manage, Sheriff. The ranch will survive." "No offense meant, Miss Oliver, but managing a cattle ranch ain't women's work. Perhaps selling to the Patterson outfit would be wiser. They've made an offer already." Anger flared through her grief. "The Pattersons have been trying to take our water rights for years." "My father would sooner," her voice broke, fresh tears welling. Sheriff Wilson sighed. "See, that's what I mean. Too emotional for business. Tears won't save your cattle or pay your debts." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Think about it. You have until the end of summer before the bank forecloses." As he walked away, Beatrice stood alone beside her father's grave, the cruel reality of her situation sinking in. The Oliver Ranch had been her family's life for 15 years, ever since they'd journeyed west from Boston after her mother's death. Now, everything rested on her shoulders deemed too fragile by everyone in Copper Creek. The ride back to the ranch was solitary and long. The late afternoon sun cast golden light across the rolling landscape, painting the scrubland in hues of amber and rust. In any other circumstance, Beatrice might have found it beautiful. Today, she saw only the miles of fence that needed mending, the cattle that needed tending, and the overwhelming impossibility of her situation. As the modest ranch house came into view, Beatrice noticed an unfamiliar horse tethered to the post outside. A tall man in a dust-covered duster leaned against the porch railing, hat tipped low over his eyes. Her heart quickened with apprehension as she drew her own horse to a stop. "Can I help you?" she called, keeping a cautious distance. The stranger straightened, pushing his hat back to reveal a face tanned by years under the western sun. He wasn't much older than her, perhaps 26 or 27, with eyes the color of a summer storm and a jawline set with determination. "Miss Oliver." His voice was deep, touched with a drawl that suggested Texas origins. "Preston Yates. I'm sorry about your father. He was a good man." Beatrice dismounted slowly. "Did you know my father? We crossed paths during the cattle drive last season. He hired me on for a spell." Preston Yates removed his hat completely now, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. "He spoke highly of you. What brings you here, Mr. Yates?" Beatrice asked, exhaustion creeping into her voice. "If you're looking for work, I'm afraid I can't offer any at present." "Actually, madam, your father sent for me." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded letter. "Got this about 3 weeks back, asking if I could come help with the summer drive. Said he wasn't feeling his best. I came as quick as I could." Beatrice took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing her father's uneven scrawl. The date indicated he'd written it just days before the fever had taken him. He never told me he'd sent for help. Jeremiah Oliver was a proud man, Preston said, but he was practical too, said you'd need a foreman who knew cattle. A foreman, Beatrice laughed bitterly. Mr. Yates, I'm barely holding onto this ranch. Everyone in town is waiting for me to fail. I couldn't pay you what you're worth. Preston studied her for a long moment, his gaze taking in her black mourning dress, her reddened eyes, the stubborn set of her chin despite it all. Your father saved my life once. I owe him a debt. Let me help you get through this summer drive. After that, we can talk about payment. Suspicion clouded her judgment. Men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. Why would you do that? Like I said, I owe your father. He glanced around at the ranch, taking in the weathered barn, the cattle pens in need of repair, the untended garden. Besides, seems to me you could use a hand right now. Beatrice wanted to refuse, to prove she could manage alone, but reality pressed in from all sides. The bank would foreclose without the income from the summer drive. The Pattersons would swoop in and claim the water rights. Everything her father had built would be lost. 1 month, she said finally. Until the drive is complete, then we'll settle accounts. Preston nodded, replacing his hat. Fair enough. They stood in awkward silence, the weight of her grief and uncertainty hanging between them. Finally, Preston spoke again. I'll see to my horse, then check the herd count before dark. We can discuss strategy over supper if that suits you. As he led his horse toward the barn, Beatrice watched him go, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake or if divine providence had sent Preston Yates to her door. Either way, she had little choice but to accept his help. For now. The next morning dawned bright and merciless, the Arizona heat building even before the sun fully crested the eastern hills. Beatrice rose early, having barely slept. She dressed in her practical clothes trousers beneath a split riding skirt, a cotton shirt, and boots well worn from years of ranch work. Her father had never restricted her to ladies' activities, a fact that had scandalized the town, but had prepared her better than most women for the realities of ranch life. She found Preston already at work in the corral, breaking a spirited yearling that needed training before it could be sold. He moved with the confident ease of someone who had spent his life around horses, anticipating the animal's movements, speaking to it in low, soothing tones. "You're up early," she commented, approaching the fence. Preston glanced her way, his expression revealing momentary surprise at her attire before he masked it. "Sun's up, work's waiting. Your father mentioned you've got about 60 head ready for the drive." 63, she confirmed. "Not the biggest herd, but quality stock. The problem is getting them to Tucson without losing any. The route crosses Patterson land, and they've been known to make things difficult." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "I've dealt with territorial ranchers before. We'll manage." He paused, studying her. "Your father also mentioned you're the best horsewoman in 3 counties. Beatrice felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. He exaggerated. "Jeremiah Oliver didn't strike me as a man who exaggerated," Preston countered, returning his attention to the yearling. "He said you could outride most men and had a better head for cattle than he did." "He taught me everything I know," she said quietly, emotion threatening to overwhelm her again. She swallowed hard, forcing it down. "I need to check the southern pasture. 2 calves were born last week." Preston nodded. "I'll finish with this one, then start repairing that section of fence near the creek. Saw it was down when I rode in yesterday." They worked separately throughout the morning, falling into an unspoken rhythm. Beatrice found the physical labor therapeutic, a respite from the grief that threatened to consume her in quiet moments. By midday, she'd checked the entire herd, treated a cow with a minor infection, and begun tallying supplies needed for the upcoming drive. She returned to find Preston repairing the porch steps, his shirt darkened with sweat. "You don't have to do that," she said, dismounting. "Noticed they were loose. Figured I'd fix them before someone took a nasty fall." He hammered a nail into place with practiced efficiency. "I also repaired the fence line and checked the well pump. It's running low, might want to conserve water until the next rain." Beatrice felt a complicated mix of gratitude and defensiveness. "We've managed this ranch for 15 years, Mr. Yates. I'm aware of its quirks." Preston set down his hammer, wiping his brow with his forearm. "Never suggested otherwise, Miss Oliver. Just doing what your father hired me for." The reminder of her father stung. "Of course, I apologize." She turned toward the house. "I'll prepare something for lunch." Inside the modest kitchen, Beatrice busied herself with making sandwiches and brewing fresh coffee. Through the window, she watched Preston finish the steps, then move on to checking the harnesses hanging in the barn. He worked methodically, without complaint, tackling jobs her father had been putting off for months. When she called him in for lunch, they ate in awkward silence until Preston finally spoke. "Your neighbors, the Pattersons, what exactly is their quarrel with your land?" Beatrice set down her coffee cup. "Water rights. Our property includes the headwaters of Copper Creek. In drought years, we control who gets water and how much. The Pattersons have been trying to buy us out since we arrived. And now they see an opportunity," Preston concluded. "Yes. Victor Patterson made an offer the day after my father's funeral." Her voice hardened. "Half what the ranch is worth." "Vultures circle when they smell weakness," Preston observed. "No offense meant, but that's how men like Patterson think. Because I'm a woman." "Because you're alone," he corrected. "And yes, because you're a woman. It isn't fair, but it's the reality we're facing." The "we" caught her attention. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Yates, but this is still my fight." Preston leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "Your father hired me because he knew what was coming. The drive through Patterson territory, the pressure from the bank, the town waiting for you to fail. He wanted to give you a fighting chance. I don't need. Everyone needs help sometimes, Miss Oliver, even the strongest among us." He gestured around the kitchen. "This ranch, everything your father built, it deserves a chance. I'm offering to help you give it that chance." Beatrice wanted to argue, to insist she could manage alone, but the truth was undeniable. 1 month, she repeated her earlier condition. "Until the cattle are sold in Tucson." 1 month, he agreed, rising to take his plate to the sink. "And Miss Oliver, there's no shame in needing help, only in being too proud to accept it." As Preston walked back outside, Beatrice remained at the table, turning his words over in her mind. Her entire life, she'd been determined to prove herself first to a mother who'd found her too sensitive, too emotional. Then to a father who, while loving, had worried about her future in this harsh land. And now to a town that saw her tears as weakness, her gender as limitation. Perhaps accepting help wasn't surrender. Perhaps it was strategy. The days that followed fell into a rhythm of shared labor. Preston proved himself invaluable, his knowledge of cattle and ranching evident in every decision he made. He worked from dawn until dusk, never complaining, tackling the most difficult tasks without being asked. Beatrice found herself gradually relaxing her guard, allowing herself to trust in his competence if not yet in his motives. A week after his arrival, disaster struck. Beatrice awoke to the sound of gunshots in the pre-dawn darkness. She grabbed her father's rifle and rushed outside to find Preston already mounted, his own gun drawn. "Rustlers," he called to her. "Trying to run off part of the herd. Stay here." But Beatrice was already mounting her own horse, the rifle secure in its saddle holster. "This is my ranch," she shouted, spurring her horse forward. They rode hard toward the southern pasture, where the most valuable breeding stock was kept. Through the dim light, Beatrice could make out 3 riders attempting to separate a dozen cattle from the main herd. Preston fired a warning shot into the air. "That's far enough." One of the rustlers turned and fired back, the bullet whizzing past Beatrice's ear. Without hesitation, Preston positioned himself between her and the danger, returning fire with deadly accuracy. One rustler fell from his horse. The other 2, seeing their companion down, abandoned their effort and fled into the darkness. "Are you hit?" Preston demanded, wheeling his horse around to face her. "No," Beatrice managed, her heart pounding. "The cattle, they're scattered but all accounted for. We'll need to round them up before they wander too far." He glanced at the fallen rustler. "I'll check him first." The man was alive but wounded, the bullet having struck his shoulder. As Preston dismounted to examine him, Beatrice recognized the face beneath the bandana. "That's Jim Barker," she said. "He works for the Pattersons." Preston's expression hardened. "Seems your neighbors are getting impatient." They bound Barker's wound and secured him to his horse. As the sun rose, they herded the scattered cattle back together, then rode to town with their prisoner in tow. Sheriff Wilson was reluctant to hold Barker, especially when Victor Patterson himself showed up to declare it all a misunderstanding. "My man was simply retrieving cattle that had strayed onto my property," Patterson insisted, his cold eyes fixed on Beatrice. "An understandable error in the dark." "Your man was 20 miles from your property," Preston countered, his voice dangerously calm. "And those cattle are clearly branded with the Oliver mark." Sheriff Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "Without witnesses besides you 2, it's his word against yours." "So you're letting him go," Beatrice said flatly. "With a warning," the sheriff amended, not meeting her eyes. "Miss Oliver, perhaps this incident should make you reconsider Mr. Patterson's offer. Running a ranch alone isn't safe for a woman." "She's not alone," Preston said firmly. "And the Oliver Ranch isn't for sale." Patterson's gaze shifted to Preston, assessing this new obstacle. "You the new foreman. Heard Jeremiah hired someone before he died. Word is he was worried his daughter would run the place into the ground with her womanly emotions." Beatrice flinched at the cruel words. "Mr. Patterson," Preston said, stepping closer to the older man, "I suggest you keep your men off Oliver land. Next time I won't aim for the shoulder." Patterson's face darkened. "Threats don't scare me, Cowboy. It's not a threat. It's a promise." Preston turned to Beatrice. "We should head back. There's work to do." The ride home was tense, Beatrice struggling to contain her anger and humiliation. "The sheriff won't help us," she finally said. "Patterson practically owns him." "Then we help ourselves," Preston replied. "Double the guard on the herd, especially at night. We'll take shifts. And the drive through Patterson land, we find another route." "There isn't one," Beatrice explained. "The mountain pass to the west is too narrow for a herd this size, and going east adds 4 days to the journey, 4 days we can't afford with limited water and supplies." Preston considered this. "Then we go through as planned, but prepared for trouble." That night, as they sat on the porch after dinner, the rustling incident weighed heavily on both their minds. The night was clear, stars puncturing the vast darkness above, the air finally cooling after the relentless heat of the day. "My father always said the stars were clearest in Arizona," Beatrice said softly. "In Boston, the city lights and fog obscured them. When we first came west, I would lie awake for hours just watching the sky." Preston leaned back in his chair, his profile illuminated by the lamplight spilling from the window. "My pa used to say the stars were holes in the floor of heaven, letting the light shine through." "That's beautiful," Beatrice said, surprised by this glimpse of sentiment. "He had his moments," Preston replied with a faint smile. when he wasn't drinking himself into oblivion or taking his frustrations out on me and my mother. Beatrice turned to study his face. "Is that why you left Texas?" "Partly." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. After a moment, he continued, "Your father spoke about you often during that cattle drive. Said you had your mother's beauty but a spirit all your own. He worried about you, but he was proud too." "He never told me that," Beatrice said, emotion tightening her throat. "Men aren't always good at saying what matters." Preston hesitated. "When we were making camp one night, your father showed me a small portrait of you he carried. You were smiling in it, but your eyes looked sad. He said you carried too much for someone so young." Beatrice blinked back tears, remembering the day that portrait was taken a year after their arrival in Arizona, still raw from her mother's death. "I used to cry easily. My mother called it my greatest weakness. She said tears were useless in a world that demanded strength." "With respect to your mother's memory, that's nonsense." Preston's voice was gentle but firm. "I've known stone-faced men who broke at the first sign of hardship, and weeping women who endured what would crush most souls." A tear slipped down Beatrice's cheek, despite her efforts to contain it. "Everyone in town thinks I'm useless, too emotional to run this ranch." "Let them think it," Preston said. "While they're underestimating you, we'll be saving your ranch." His confidence warmed something in her that had been cold since her father's death. "Thank you for staying," she said quietly. "For helping." Preston's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Tears don't make you weak, Miss Oliver. They're just water and salt, life-giving elements. My grandmother used to say, tears grow the strongest roots. The soil needs rain to bear fruit." For the first time since her father's death, Beatrice felt the crushing weight of expectation lift slightly. In Preston Yates's eyes, she wasn't a failure waiting to happen. She was simply human, navigating grief and challenge as best she could. As the days passed, their working relationship evolved into something deeper. They shared meals and stories, laughter and concerns. Preston taught Beatrice new techniques for handling the cattle, while she showed him the hidden beauty of the land. She loved the secret waterfall beyond the North Ridge, the ancient petroglyphs carved into canyon walls, the perfect spot to watch sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. 2 weeks before the scheduled drive to Tucson, they received word that Patterson had hired extra men to patrol his borders. The implicit threat was clear. "He's planning to stop us," Beatrice said, pacing the kitchen after Sheriff Wilson delivered the news with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Or steal the herd once we're on his land." Preston studied the crude map spread on the table. "What if we split the herd? Send the main group through Patterson land as expected, but drive the most valuable stock, say, 20 head through the mountain pass to the west." "It's risky," Beatrice considered. "The pass is treacherous." "So is Patterson," Preston countered. "This way, even if he interferes with the main drive, we preserve enough cattle to keep the bank satisfied." They spent hours refining the plan, identifying which cattle to separate, calculating the timing so both groups would arrive in Tucson within a day of each other. It was well past midnight when they finally had a strategy they believed might work. As Beatrice rolled up the map, her hand brushed Preston's. The touch, though brief, sent warmth spreading through her arm. Their eyes met, held. "It's late," Preston said, his voice rough. "We should get some rest." But neither moved. In the lamplight, Beatrice could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the intensity in his gray eyes, the slight parting of his lips. Something had been building between them, something neither had acknowledged. "Preston," she began, the use of his first name intimate in the quiet kitchen. A crash from outside shattered the moment. They rushed to the door to find the barn ablaze, flames licking hungrily at the wooden structure. "The horses," Beatrice cried, already running toward the inferno. Preston caught her arm. "I'll get the horses, you get water." The next hours passed in desperate struggle against the fire. They managed to save all 5 horses and most of the equipment, but the barn itself was beyond salvaging. By dawn, only smoldering ruins remained. "This was deliberate," Preston said grimly, examining a broken lantern that reeked of coal oil. "Someone wanted to send a message." Beatrice stared at the destruction, her face streaked with soot, her eyes red from smoke and unshed tears. "Patterson." "Most likely," Preston agreed. "But we have no proof." "We don't need proof to know the truth." Beatrice's voice hardened with resolve. "He thinks this will break me, make me sell." Preston studied her face. "Will it?" "Never." The word was a vow. "This ranch is all I have left of my father. I'll rebuild this barn myself if I have to." Preston moved closer, gently brushing a smudge of soot from her cheek. "Not by yourself. We'll rebuild it together." The touch lingered, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. Beatrice looked up into his eyes, seeing something there that made her breath catch concern, admiration, and something deeper, something that mirrored the feelings taking root in her own heart. "Why are you really here, Preston?" she asked softly. "The truth. It can't just be a debt to my father." Preston's hand fell away, but he remained close. "When your father hired me last year, I was at a crossroads, drifting from job to job, no place to call home, no purpose beyond the next paycheck. He saw something in me I didn't see in myself." "What was that?" "Potential. Worth." Preston glanced at the burned barn, then back to her. He talked about his daughter who loved this land as fiercely as he did, who cried when the spring calves were born, who read poetry by lamplight, who stood up to men twice her size when they tried to cheat him at market. Beatrice felt tears welling again, but this time she didn't fight them. "He said all that, and more." Preston took a deep breath. "When his letter came asking for help, saying he was ill, I didn't come just because I owed him. I came because I wanted to meet the woman he described. The woman with a heart big enough to love this harsh land, brave enough to stand her ground in a man's world." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Beatrice felt something shift inside her, like a door opening to possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider. "And now that you've met her," she whispered, Preston's eyes never left hers, "now I understand why your father loved this place so much, why he fought so hard for it, and why I need to help you keep it." The moment stretched, taut with unspoken feelings. Finally, Beatrice broke the tension. "We should salvage what we can from the barn, then rest. The cattle drive starts in 2 weeks." Preston nodded, respecting her retreat. "I'll start sorting through the debris." As they worked side by side in the aftermath of destruction, Beatrice found herself watching Preston the careful way he handled salvaged tools, his gentleness with the still nervous horses, the determination in every movement. She was beginning to understand that tears weren't her weakness. They were evidence of her capacity to feel deeply, to care profoundly. And perhaps that was her greatest strength. The day of the cattle drive dawned clear and hot. Beatrice and Preston had spent the previous 2 weeks preparing, meticulously dividing the herd, mapping routes, hiring 2 additional hands for the main drive. Despite the setback of the barn fire, they were as ready as they could be. Preston would lead the smaller, more valuable group through the mountain pass, while Beatrice would guide the main herd along the traditional route through Patterson land. The separation was strategic, but as the moment of parting approached, Beatrice felt an unexpected pang of loss. "Remember, if you encounter trouble, prioritize your safety over the cattle," Preston instructed as they made final preparations. "The bank can't foreclose if we get even half these cattle to market at a good price." "I can handle Patterson," Beatrice assured him, checking her pistol before securing it in its holster. "Just make it through that pass safely." Preston stepped closer, adjusting the bandana at her throat. 3 days to Tucson. We'll meet at the Grand Hotel as planned." His fingers lingered at her neck, his eyes conveying what words couldn't. They'd grown close in these weeks of shared purpose and danger, but neither had acted on the attraction simmering between them. "Preston," Beatrice began, gathering her courage. "When this is over," he interrupted gently, "when the cattle are sold and the ranch is secure, we'll talk. About everything." She nodded, understanding. This wasn't the time for confessions or complications. They had a ranch to save. With a final nod, Preston mounted his horse. "See you in Tucson, Miss Oliver." "See you in Tucson, Mr. Yates," she replied, the formality a thin veil over the emotion in her voice. The drives began smoothly, both groups moving at a steady pace through the familiar terrain. Beatrice led her 40 head with confidence, the 2 hired hands brothers from a neighboring ranch following her lead without question. By midday of the second day, they reached the border of Patterson land. As expected, they were met by 4 of Patterson's men, including the recovered Jim Barker, his arm still in a sling. "This is private property," Barker announced, blocking the trail. Beatrice urged her horse forward. "We have traditional rite of passage for the cattle drive. Your boss knows that." "Traditional rites can change," another man said with a smirk. "Mr. Patterson says you'll need to pay a fee this year, $5 per head." "That's robbery," Beatrice protested. "The going rate for passage is 50 cents per head, and you know it." Barker shrugged. "Inflation." "Take it or turn back." Beatrice calculated quickly. $200 was more than she could afford, but turning back meant disaster. "I'll pay $1 per head. That's fair." "Boss says 5 or nothing," Barker insisted. "Or you could always accept his offer for the ranch and be done with all this." As Beatrice struggled to find a solution, hoofbeats sounded behind her. Turning, she was astonished to see Sheriff Wilson approaching with 3 deputies. "What's going on here, Barker?" the sheriff called. "Just explaining Mr. Patterson's new passage fees to Miss Oliver," Barker replied, clearly uncomfortable. Sheriff Wilson rode closer, positioning himself between Beatrice and Patterson's men. "Funny thing, I was just in Judge Harmon's office this morning, reviewing county regulations. Seems there's a statute limiting passage fees to no more than 75 cents per head on established cattle trails. Signed into law when Arizona was still just a territory." Beatrice couldn't hide her surprise. Sheriff Wilson had never been an ally before. "Mr. Patterson won't like this," Barker warned. "Mr. Patterson doesn't make the law," Sheriff Wilson replied firmly. "Now step aside and let these cattle through." Barker and his men reluctantly moved off the trail. As Beatrice guided the herd forward, the sheriff fell in beside her. "Thank you," she said, still confused by his intervention. "But why? Your father was right about you," Sheriff Wilson interrupted. "Said you had more grit than most men he knew, tears or no tears." "You spoke to my father about me," the sheriff nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "He came to me before he died, asked me to keep an eye on you. Said I'd been letting Patterson get away with too much. He was right." Beatrice felt a rush of gratitude toward her father. Even in his final days, he'd been laying groundwork to protect her. "Patterson won't give up easily," she cautioned. "I know. That's why we're escorting you all the way to the county line." Sheriff Wilson adjusted his hat. "It's the least I can do for Jeremiah's daughter." The remainder of the journey passed without incident. When they reached Tucson, Beatrice was relieved to find Preston already waiting at the livestock yard, his smaller herd safely delivered despite the treacherous mountain pass. Their reunion was professional in public, but his eyes told her everything she needed to know. That night, After securing fair prices for their cattle enough to pay off the bank debt and still have capital for rebuilding, they finally had their promised conversation. They walked together through Tucson's quieter streets, the desert night cool around them, stars brilliant overhead. "You were right," Beatrice said softly. "About my tears, they don't make me weak." Preston took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Your father told me once that when your mother died, you cried for 3 days straight. Then on the 4th day, you packed your belongings and told him you were ready to go west. He said he'd never seen such strength in someone so young." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "I didn't feel strong. I felt broken." "Maybe being broken and being strong aren't opposites," Preston suggested. "Maybe the breaking is what allows the strength to grow." They stopped walking, turning to face each other in the silver moonlight. Preston reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't plan this, Beatrice. When I came to help with the ranch, I didn't expect to fall in love." She finished for him, her heart pounding. His smile was tender. "Is that what happened to you too?" Instead of answering, Beatrice rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with months of unspoken longing. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "That's exactly what happened to me." They returned to the Oliver ranch 3 days later, the future stretching before them bright with possibility. The bank debt was cleared. The immediate threat from Patterson neutralized by Sheriff Wilson's newfound backbone, and plans for a new barn already underway. As they crested the final hill, and the ranch came into view, Preston pulled his horse alongside hers. "What do you see when you look at this land, Beatrice?" She gazed at the sprawling landscape, the weathered house, the grazing cattle, the rugged beauty that had captured her heart all those years ago. "I see home. Challenges, yes, but also promise. Room to grow, room for two." Preston asked quietly. Beatrice turned to him, her heart full. "Room for a family, if that's what we want." His smile warmed her more than the Arizona sun. "I'd like that very much, Miss Oliver." "Mrs. Yates, eventually," she corrected with a smile of her own. They rode the final distance home side by side, their shadows stretching long across the land that had tested them, broken them, and ultimately made them stronger together. Beatrice felt tears of gratitude spring to her eyes, but this time she didn't try to hide them. These weren't tears of weakness or sorrow. These were tears that nourished the deepest roots of all love, hope, and the promise of a future hard-won and richly deserved.